Hey guys, coming to you today with another video on what's new in Mosaic version 13. And this one is going to be a little bit different to most videos. I'm actually going to run through in a software called Canva here, just some screenshots and talk to you about why this feature exists. Now, this was actually a personal request that I had for Mosaic. I wanted to see the ability to control the cut direction per pass. Now, most of you might be thinking, why do we need that? And this video is designed to sort of go through and educate you a little bit about why the option exists and why I think it's a great idea to potentially have separate directions per pass. And we'll come to the, I guess, reasoning and science behind all of that in this video. So it's going to be a little bit of a different one. And, I've definitely gone down the rabbit hole here in terms of really deep dive into the theory and science behind everything to do with tooling. We're talking tool deflection, chip thinning, positive and negative rake angles, the tool engagement angles, the flute engagement angle. Like, I've gone well and truly beyond the rabbit hole into this to try and understand, I guess, the different science out there and the theories on how we can improve not just your cut quality, but your tool life, how long your cutters are lasting. And also talk about how this information that I'm about to share with you could potentially help you just get a better finish on your material, on your ramp in, lead in, and lead out specifically, and also just increase the life of your cutters. So all of this, I guess, is going to come with a bit of a warning that, this is very much a grain of salt type of information. Like, it is different. There are a lot of variables out there. So, what material you're cutting, what tools you're using, what machine you're cutting on. There's a crazy amount of variables, but I wanted to share some of the information with you so you can kind of make your own somewhat educated decision on what you think, whether you might actually use this new feature, or, at least decide for yourself, like, whether you think it's worth trying and giving it a go. So what I have in front of me here is a screenshot of the updated toolpath properties. And what we're looking at here in the highlighted red area is the cut direction. And as you'll see, I've got my first pass set to conventional and my second pass set to climb. Now, many people watching this might not even understand what either of those mean. And when we're talking specifically just about cutting the parts out, what I'm referring to when I say conventional is moving in a counterclockwise direction. And when I say climb cutting, I'm talking about moving in a clockwise direction, the motion of the CNC machine. Now, that's being very general, because if you're doing an internal cut rather than an external cut, it's the exact opposite. But we're going to keep it, as simple as we can in this video. And I'm just going to talk specifically more about cutting parts out and what's relevant to the general Mosaic users. We're talking about cutting and nesting components on a CNC machine. So we're talking about the manufacturing of things like MDF, particle board, melamine materials, talking about substrates like plywood and things like that. We're talking about mostly about manufactured materials being machined on a CNC machine. So let's get into the problem, what the reason is, or, what the common thing that comes across my desk is of the reason why this feature exists in the first place. So there's a phenomenon called tool deflection, right? And what we're talking about there is, if you look at the example on the left of screen here, this is a compression cutter that is against the side of a material. Now, like this picture there, the compression cutter should be pretty much nice and straight. If I zoom in here, it should pretty much just be nice and straight along the material, right? Now, depending on how much load and force that cutter is under, it isn't always like that in reality. In reality, you can get this situation where the tool is actually bending out of shape. Now, that phenomenon is called tool deflection. Okay, well, commonly known as tool deflection, where the tool is actually flexing, and it can flex in towards the material and take a sort of bite out of the material at the point where you're doing your onion skin, or it can also lead to pass, like the final cuts not being completely straight if you are cutting through in one hit. If you are sort of doing a step over cut or an oversize on your first pass, potentially you're going to have a problem where there's a little lip where the onion skin meets, because the second pass is not under as much load. Now, that flex or deflection can happen. It can go in towards the material, or it can go out away from the material, depending on your direction. So if only it was that simple that you could just set the direction to make it flex away. And in a overly simplified view, potentially that's what you've been doing, and maybe that's been somewhat working for you. But I guess the reason for this video is I want to challenge you to think that maybe your tool life isn't as good as it could be due to just having your machine direction set based on tool deflection. So these videos have been sent in by one of the Mosaic customers. Now, this is on a CNC machine that's a little bit of an older machine, so it's perhaps got a bit more of a slop in the axis movements and the motions. So there's a bit of backlash on the machine. The axes aren't quite as tight and, I guess, sound as they once were. And the machine doesn't have the highest horsepower spindle compared to some of the machines on the market. So what I will point out is that it's common on secondhand machines and also entry-level type machines to have this problem where when you cut in dense materials like MDF or medium density fiberboard, you will notice machine marks. Now, sometimes you can feel them, like you can see in this picture, it's pretty evident that you'll be able to feel that machine mark. And then from the top view, as you can see with a straight ruler on top of that, you can actually see here for about sort of around 30 millimeters there, it's actually dipping in slightly. And that is happening at a point where we're entering into the material and it's sort of, the machine's almost wavering off its line and then coming back and going straight. And that's when it's under the maximum force. So as it enters down into the material here and then takes off, that's where it's at its maximum force, and that's where you can get this deflection happening at the most. Now, what can you do about it? So there's a couple of things before we even talk about, I guess, the functions in Mosaic. Now, the most common cause of deflection happens to be poorly clamped tools. Okay, so what I mean by that is if you look at this example on the left here, the tool has a lot of the tool holder itself, the shaft of the tool, sticking out of the collet and the tool holder itself. So the tool is sticking too far out of the collet, and therefore that is going to have more vibrations, more flex in the carbide, right? Because it's been held by a tiny bit up here and it's under pressure. Think of like if you took a steel ruler or just any old ruler and you overhang it over the edge of your desk, right? And you take that ruler and let's say you only overhang it by an inch or 25 millimeters, right? There's a lot of rigidity in that still. So it's not sticking too far over your desk that there's not much flex in it. However, if you took an overhang, say, the majority of that ruler, like a 30 centimeter ruler, if you went, let's say 25 centimeters over your desk, right? Then there's going to be a lot of flex in that. And it's the same with tools, regardless of the fact that this is either high-speed steel or carbide. There's still going to be flex in that, and we're not talking about like 4 or 5 millimeters of flex. We're talking about micro millimeters, but it's enough to notice the machine marks, right? So what I'm talking about here is making sure that your tooling, first of all, is pretty much machine clamped right up to a millimeter or 2 millimeters past the top of the flute, right? So you just want enough space there for chips to be evacuated and to come out of the material without it, while you've got the maximum amount in the tool holder as possible to give you the maximum rigidity in the tool to stop the deflection. Now, sometimes that's all you need to do and that's enough, right? On some machines. On other machines, that's not enough, right? Now, I will also point out that the diameter of the tool can also have a big difference. Now, even a change of 2 millimeters can increase your rigidity by a factor of 4, right? So if I went from a 10 millimeter diameter compression cutter to a 12 millimeter diameter compression cutter, that's actually 4 times stronger rigidity, which means that it's going to have 4 times less flex when it's under load and under pressure. So a lot of factors beyond software, just talking physical tooling here at the moment, that you need to consider. Let's come down and talk about the age-old question, conventional versus climb, right? Now, this conversation, when I first sort of thought about this conversation, I kind of thought about it like the direction toilet water spins between our two great nations, right? So we've got in Australia our toilet water spinning one direction, and in the States it's going the opposite direction, right? Now, does it matter? Is the direction important? Well, it turns out it is important, and there are many different scientific papers and things written on this very topic. So I'll just scroll down here and talk about this. There's so much theory out there in why you should cut clockwise, or let's say climb cut in, or why you should cut conventional cut in. Now, without getting too deep into the theory, I will point out that the majority of this information isn't as relevant to what we're talking about, machining parts for building cabinets, right? This has a lot more weight when you're talking about machining things like metals that are less forgiving, have more force, more impact. So, and more heat, I guess, is the primary thing there. Metal's always going to generate more heat than timber. So any type of wood or composite wood that you're cutting isn't going to generate as much heat as a metal would, right? So the chip evacuation and all the science behind this, I mean, it's important, but at the same time, this information can't just be taken as like gospel for what we're doing, because I think we can maybe simplify this to a certain degree. When we're talking about cutting directions, like there are some great information and different rules of thumb that I'll get to in this video that we can take away from this. One takeaway for me when I went down the rabbit hole of looking into all this information and the science behind everything is the one thing that keeps coming over and over as standing out is that the thing you really want to avoid is having any negative rake when machining anything, right? Because negative rake's going to generate more heat. It's going to give you a less effective and efficient cut, and you're just going to burn through tools quicker. You're not going to cut as clean, and you're just generating more heat and friction on your machine. So let's zoom out a little bit here, and we'll come down and talk about some examples of climb cutting and conventional cutting. When you're talking about cutting all the way through your material, right? You actually are climb and conventional cutting at the same time. So it's an interesting conversation. But let's just look at, before we get into that, let's look at some of these specifics, right? When you climb cutting, you're feeding in this direction here. So you're moving, if I'm doing an outside external cut, I'm moving in the clockwise direction. And my tool is also spinning in the clockwise direction. And typically speaking, then I am cutting a slice of material away, or a chip, from thick to thin, right? So what we're looking at this diagram of this chip is it starts out at its widest and its thickest point as the tool engages the material, and then as it slices through, it comes down to the thinnest part of the material, which should give you, it allows it to get a better bite on the material, right, to begin with. And I'll cover this a bit more as we scroll further down. I've got different examples that will kind of explain this a little bit better. But for now, just take away that climb cutting will generate a chip that is from thick to thin, and your conventional cutting will do the opposite, right? So we're still spinning in a clockwise motion, but we're moving now in a counterclockwise motion. And so what you've got here is that we're now generating a chip that starts down here at nothing all the way up to the thickest point as it moves out of the material, right? So we're going from thin to thick. Coming down, we've got some examples drawn up in SketchUp, and I think the most important thing when we're talking about this tool deflection is to control whether or not that flex is happening, or which way the flex is going, I guess I should say. So as I mentioned a moment ago, when you're doing a trench, and typically you always are when you're doing a full slot cut for your first pass. Okay, so if you're doing a first pass and you're entering the material and you're coming down and you're cutting through, you are actually cutting both climb and conventional all at the same time, because one side of the line is going to be climb cutting and the other side of the line is going to be conventional cutting. So you might think, why does it matter then if I'm doing both? Well, it matters on the first pass, and this is why I wanted the option in Mosaic to be able to control this individually. On the first pass, if you are conventional cutting, your tool flex, as indicated here by this arrow, is actually moving. The pressure is going to push this backwards and slightly away from the material, effectively pushing the tool into the off-cut portion, or the portion that's going to be the distance between your parts, right? So effectively, as that tool flexes away from the material, you're less likely to end up with this scenario where you've got these marks, right? Because now we're not flexing in towards the material, we're flexing away from the material. And interestingly, I put out a post about this a while ago on the various Mosaic pages, and overwhelmingly, pretty much everyone in Australia does climb cutting for both passes, and pretty much everyone in America does conventional cutting for both passes. There's exceptions to it, but that's the overwhelming majority. And that's what kind of sparked me to do a deep dive into understanding why that is, and what the different theories are out there, and how we could learn from this. So conventional cutting to me makes sense on the first pass, because if you're cutting any more than 50% of the diameter of the tool, you really care about just moving the flex of the material away, the flex of the tool away from the material, to keep the material edge as good as possible. With surface finish has to come before anything else. Your surface finish is paramount before you start thinking about tool life and you start thinking about chip evacuation and everything else. Now, when you climb cutting, the pressure on the tool isn't as great as it would be for conventional. Remembering at the moment we're doing both, which is why my arrows are pretty much the same length, right? Because there's an equal force on the tool. However, when you're thinking about the climb direction, kind of as it's indicating here, if this is the direction you're traveling, you actually are, the force on the tool is going to be moving forward with the tool, but it's also going to be angled slightly towards the finished part, which can be a problem. Now, you might be thinking, well, I climb cut and this is never a problem for me. I don't have those marks. And that might be because you've got a great tool holder. So, even the quality of the tool holder and the collet can make a difference. The quality of the tool definitely makes a difference. And the power of your machine, the spindle, the horsepower of the spindle, the acceleration factor of your machine. There's so many variables in it and we're talking about such minute measurements here that this may not be a problem for you at all. But I wanted to really do a deep dive to explain this topic, because it does come across my desk quite a lot. And this is somewhat an educational video, really, more so than talking about the feature in Mosaic, because the feature is very simple, really. It's just the direction. Which way do you want each pass to travel? But I really need to go to this level of explaining it to understand, or to pass on that education on why I think this is a great idea to do conventional first and climb second. And I'm getting to the climb second bit. So looking at a down perspective here, as we mentioned, when we're conventional cutting, we're going from a thin to a thicker chip, and we're feeding in this direction. Our tool's flexing slightly away from the material. And in the climb example, we're feeding across the material this way, and we're going from a thick to a thin chip, and our tool's flexing slightly in towards the material. Okay. And there's just another view of that same outcome, and another one again. So just showing you some different perspectives so you can sort of get an idea of what's happening there. Now, in Mosaic, you'll be aware that you have the option to do a skin offset, which I'd say the vast majority of people utilize that, because most people do tend to onion skin when they're cutting on a CNC machine, which means they're leaving about 1 millimeter of material at the bottom of the part and oversizing by a small factor there, right? Now, that small factor is actually pretty important. And what I learned from doing this deep dive is that at a maximum, you never really want to be cutting something less than the 5% of the tool's diameter, right? Let me try and explain that. Let's say your tool diameter is 10 millimeters. 5% of that is half a millimeter. So 0.5 is 5% of 10 millimeters. Now, that should be the absolute minimum that you are shaving off. The reason for that, anything less than that is only going to cause rubbing and friction on your tool because you're not engaging the flute of the tool enough to actually cleanly slice the material away. You're literally just kind of like grinding or rubbing the material away. You are not slicing that, which means heat. Heat means friction. Friction means heat. And heat means that your cutters are going to burn out much quicker. So, assuming you are doing an onion skin, rule of thumb, 5% of your tool diameter is absolute minimum you should go. If you've got that set to like 0.3 and you're doing a 10 mil tool, increase it to 0.5. Otherwise you are literally just burning your tools out faster than they need to be. Coming down now, looking at tool flex in the example where we're only cutting a fraction of the material away. This is where it gets pretty interesting, right? Because this is where climb cut wins every day of the week. If you're conventional cutting a shallow amount of material away, you're effectively just rubbing the back of the tool along the material, right? Because what's happening here is the tool is actually flexing away from the material, and there's more deflection in a conventional cut because there's more force on the tool when it's doing a shallow cut. The tool flex from a climb cut on a shallow cut like this is so insignificant. It's next to nothing. It is slightly, again, forward and towards the material, but that's actually a good thing because at such a shallow cut, it's going to help the tool bite into the material and slice it and cut it cleanly rather than friction rub that material away. Now, when we're talking about this cutting motion here, as we mentioned earlier, climb cutting is going from a thick chip to a thin chip, right? And as described up here. Okay, so we're cutting the most of the material away at the top and then going down to nothing, which the theory behind that is it's going to help the tool bite. It's going to help allow the tool to evacuate the chip properly. And it's just going to allow the tool to create a chip that can be evacuated. So for all those reasons, climb cutting on a shallow second pass is always going to be a better result than conventional cutting on a shallow second pass. Okay. The rule of thumb that I think you can take away from this is if you're cutting more than or less than, say, 50% of the tool diameter, you should climb cut. If you're going more than 50% of the tool, so if this tool here, I'm just going to ungroup this and show you, this tool here was more than 50% of the tool, so if we're all the way in the material like this, then I want a conventional cut. If I'm more than 50%, I want a conventional cut. If I'm less than 50%, if I'm like fractionally in or just somewhere up to the 50% mark in, I want a climb cut. And I think that's a really good rule of thumb to take away. So all of that leads me to say, which is better? Well, my outcome is why not both? Hence the new option in Mosaic version 13 to be able to set your cut direction to the way you please. And my suggestion would be to conventional cut the first pass and climb cut the second pass. Very long-winded video to get to that point, but I wanted to really give you the education of understanding what's happening and what problem we're trying to solve, which is this problem of tool deflection and the I guess the invisible problem that most of you might be facing and might not even be aware of, rubbing and decreasing your tool life when doing a shallow second pass. So hopefully that's been helpful. I'd love, to discuss this further and in the comments. So feel free to share some information, share your thoughts, share your experience. Again, all of this pretty much can be taken with a grain of salt because there are so many variables while we're talking about different machines. And, you might have tried both and had different outcomes. I would love to discuss it and hear about it. But from all the science that I've divulged while going deep into this crazy rabbit hole of the world of CNC machining and understanding the scientific information out there, this is what I could come up with as being helpful for, I guess, the majority of our customers' situations. So as you can see, hopefully you can take away from this video is that you can see that our team here at Mosaic are doing pretty much everything we can to help ensure that we're not just improving the software, but we're adding improvements that have motivation behind improving outcomes for you guys beyond software. Like we're talking tool life, we're talking surface material finish quality. So we're trying to lead the way and set a new standard for CNC machining and cabinet making industry. Hope this has been helpful. That's enough of me for today. Thanks for sticking with it, and I'll catch you on the next one.